Act today, quite literally. My friends, when the great American civil rights leader, Martin Luther King, quoted from our Hebrew Bible, from the book of Amos, "Let justice roll like water, and righteousness like a mighty spring." We had hoped that we would have a president who would follow in those footsteps. We had hoped that our first African-American president, which gave credence to the biblical idea that every human being is created equally in the image of God, we had hoped that a president who was gifted with oratorical skills like few others who have preceded him in that office. We had hoped that a president who had professed his kinship and friendship with the world's only Jewish state and America's Jewish community. We had hoped that he would follow in the footsteps of America's great civil rights leaders to stand up for human dignity and to champion human freedom. Instead, what we got was the indiscriminate slaughter of 500,000 of our Arab brothers and sisters in Syria, while the body behind us did absolutely nothing. No! While Aleppo fell over the past few weeks, while Arab children were facing attacks from the air with mustard and sarin gas, that body across the street was too busy condemning Israelis for growing pomegranates in Shiloh and Bethel, and then, my friends, to ignore a genocide while you obsess with the Jews. That, my friends, is an abomination. To ignore the slaughter of Yazidis, to ignore the extermination of Christians in the Middle East, to ignore the slaughter of Sunnis by Alawites and Shias in Syria, to ignore Iran, the world's foremost state sponsor of terror, according to John Kerry, whose speech is competing with mine at this very moment, by the way. And we know who's going to get a better audience. To ignore the participation of Iran, the world's foremost state sponsor of terror, and sending their terror proxy army Hezbollah into Syria to slaughter innocent Arabs. To ignore all those three genocides. A genocide which was defined by the United Nations, a new term by Raphael Lemkin, a Holocaust survivor, means the targeting of an ethnic group for annihilation. To ignore three taking place in the same region and not pass a single United Nations Security Council resolution condemning the genocide, but to pass one condemning the Jews for building nurseries, for building extra bedrooms. My friends, that is the classic definition of anti-Israel bias. If that isn't prejudice, then the word has no meaning. I ask Samantha Power, whose office sits in this building. I have been in that office. I once considered Samantha a good friend, someone I looked up to because she was the world's foremost voice against genocide. I took her to meet Elie Wiesel, the greatest Jew of our generation, who we recently lost just 6 months back. I stood behind Samantha. I sat behind her literally at her Senate confirmation hearings when she was asked by the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, "Will you protect Israel at the United Nations?" And she said she absolutely would. And we now know with those assurances. And let me tell of Samantha Power is that she did not pass a single resolution condemning the Syrian genocide. Not one. Utterly obliterating any pretension she has to be an anti-genocide campaigner. Because it seems, according to credible media reports, that she and Susan Rice and John Kerry and President Obama were too busy. They were too busy to focus on the fall of Aleppo. They were too busy to focus on the slaughter of Arab children. They were too busy to focus on the rubble that that great ancient city was turned into, because they were writing, together with the Egyptians and New Zealand and Malaysia and these great human rights bastions like Venezuela, a resolution attacking Israel. For those of you who believe that the United Nations attacked Israel last Friday, you are mistaken. The United Nations assaulted decency itself. When you fixate on the Jews to the exclusion of all other innocent people who are dying, you are committing an affront to humanity. This president watched Aleppo fall and did nothing because Jews might pray at the Western Wall. How could that possibly make sense, my friends? And I want to tell you, I think today of the memory of Franklin Roosevelt, who was the president who stopped Hitler. And we can debate whether he could have done more to bomb the train tracks to Auschwitz. But in creating the United Nations, in having its first meeting in San Francisco, and then out in Queens, where Israel was voted to be a state, today it's the Queens Museum, and finally moving here on land donated by the Rockefellers. Roosevelt envisioned a security apparatus that would stop conflict, that would champion the righteous, that would protect the downtrodden, and the United Nations has become, unfortunately, something that does precisely the reverse. It protects Iran. It protects governments that slaughter innocents. We haven't had one resolution condemning the genocide in Syria, but we've had 18 against the Jewish state of Israel. After the Holocaust, the UN was created to ensure that things like this would never happen again, that no nation would be demonized, and look at that demonization now. My friends, it makes no difference that our numbers may be small today, because 2,000 years ago, a small band of brothers looked at the mighty Assyrian Greek army and they said that Ma'atim, that a small number, that the rabbin, that the majority can be delivered into their hands. We are small, but we are mighty. We will light our candles and we will illuminate the darkness of this world. We will illuminate the darkness of the United Nations. We will stand up for justice. We will stand up for freedom. We will stand up for democracy. We will create a Middle East where no woman is ever beaten because she doesn't put on a piece of cloth on her head if she chooses not to. We will create a Middle East where every person gets to vote and choose governments wasn't built by patriots who believed in liberty and freedom, and everything that that institution represents has become contrary to it. Let us be like Judah Maccabee, Judah the hammer. Let us take injustice and shatter it. Let us stand up for the lives of our Arab brothers and sisters in Syria. Let us be a voice for their obliteration. Let us tell Barack Obama, focus on those people who are dying and leave Israel alone. Let Israel be. What if the Arabs in the Middle East had the freedoms that Israeli Arabs had? What if all Arabs in the Middle East, all Arab women, had the freedoms that Israeli Arab women had? What if that all Arabs in the Middle East not have to fear their governments the way Israeli Arab citizens need not? What if that all Arabs in the Middle East had parliamentary representation the way Israeli Arabs have? My friends, on Hanukkah, we light the candles, and Israel is that candle. Israel is the light. Israel is the blessing. To all of you, keep on fighting. Let us never the Maccabees had to die for a cause. That will never be us again. Too many Jews have died through terrible oppression. But then you can live for a cause, but that's not enough. Let us join as Maccabees and fight for a cause.